There's a machine that doesn't exist. It has an infinite paper tape, a tiny head that reads symbols one at a time, and a list of rules so simple a child could follow them. It cannot do anything fancy. It cannot multitask. It cannot connect to the internet, and yet every single piece of software you have ever used, every video you've streamed, every message you've sent, every algorithm that decided what you saw this morning is mathematically a version of that machine. A British mathematician imagined it in 1936 to settle a question about logic. He accidentally invented your entire century. Over the next 20 minutes, you'll understand why computer science is not really about computers, what the single most important idea in the field actually is, and why the gap between this problem can be solved and this problem can be solved before the universe ends is the quiet engine running underneath modern life. Stay with me, because by the time we're done, the way you look at the device in your hand will have shifted, not in a dramatic way, in a permanent one. A computer science degree takes 4 years and around $165,000. This takes 20 minutes. Welcome to Skip the Degree. Let's start with the thing nobody tells you on day one. Computer science is not the study of computers. Astronomers don't call themselves telescope scientists. Biologists don't call themselves microscope scientists. The computer is the instrument. The actual subject is something far stranger. It's the study of what can be done in finite steps by anything, anywhere, ever. Your laptop is one example. Your brain is another. A line of dominoes is weirdly a third. A trained pigeon following a sequence of pecks is technically a fourth. A bureaucracy following a flowchart is depressingly a fifth. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The field is not about silicon. It's about what's possible. Which brings us to the man with the imaginary machine. Alan Turing was 24. He was a graduate student at Cambridge, awkward, brilliant, a long-distance runner who once jogged 40 miles to a meeting because he didn't trust trains. He wore his pajamas under his suit when it got cold. He chained his coffee mug to the radiator so colleagues wouldn't steal it. He was trying to answer a question posed by a German mathematician named David Hilbert. Is there a procedure that can decide for any mathematical statement whether it's true or false? A universal answer machine. Hilbert thought yes, Turing wanted to know, so he did something nobody had done before. He defined what a procedure even meant. He invented a fictional device, paper tape, reading head, a finite list of states, and proved that anything you could compute by following step-by-step instructions, this fake machine could compute too. Anything. Multiplication, chess strategy, your tax return, the recommendation algorithm on your phone, all of it reducible to a head shuffling along a tape. And then, in the same paper, he proved Hilbert wrong. There are problems no procedure can ever solve. Some truths are unreachable. The universal answer machine cannot exist. That paper, written before transistors, before electricity-based computing, before the word software, is the foundation of everything you're holding. It tells us two things at once. First, there is one kind of computation, and every device that does it is fundamentally the same machine wearing different clothes. A 1970s mainframe and the chip in your wireless earbuds are formally the same animal. Second, that machine has hard limits. Not engineering limits, mathematical limits. There are questions it will never answer, no matter how fast it runs, no matter how large it grows, no matter how many billions of dollars are spent making it bigger. Now, the second foundational idea, and this one is sneakier. Everything inside that machine, every photograph, every song, every emotion expressed in a text message is a number. Not represented by a number is a number. The image of your mother is a long integer. The song you cried to last summer is a long integer. The novel you're reading is a long integer. A computer cannot see, hear, or feel anything. It pushes binary digits, zeros and ones, through logic gates that physically implement 3 operations. And, or not. From those 3 primitives, layered millions of times, you get TikTok. This is the most violent abstraction in human history, and we barely think about it. Reality, encoded as numbers, manipulated by switches, decoded back into something that makes you laugh or cry or call your ex. The fact that this works at all should keep you up at night. Most of computer science in practice is the art of building taller and taller towers of abstraction on top of those 3 operations, until eventually a child in Lagos can swipe a screen and watch a video filmed in Seoul. And the entire stack, every layer, every translation disappears from view. Magic, except it isn't, just very, very patient bookkeeping. The third idea is the one that separates people who code from people who do computer science. It's the difference between solvable and tractable. A problem is solvable if there exists a procedure that finishes in finite time. A problem is tractable if it finishes before you die. These are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. Here's the example that breaks people. The traveling salesman problem. You have 30 cities. You want the shortest route that visits each one exactly once and returns home. Solvable? Of course. Just check every possible route and pick the shortest. How many roots? 30 factorial. That's roughly 265 nonillion possibilities. A computer doing 1 trillion roots per second would need about 8 billion years to finish. The universe is younger than that. Add 5 more cities and the calculation outlasts the predicted lifespan of every star. The problem has a solution. The solution is unreachable. This is the thing that quietly governs everything from your GPS to drug discovery to how Netflix decides what to recommend you tonight. The difference between yes in theory and yes before the heat death of the universe. Computer science is largely the war against that gap. Hold on to this distinction. It explains more than it should. Now let's talk about the breaks, the places where the field cracked open and had to rebuild itself. The first rupture is a man named Edsger Dijkstra, sitting in a cafe in Amsterdam in 1956, waiting for his fiancée. Dijkstra was 26. I recently married, a physicist by training who had switched to programming because he found it more honest. His mother was a mathematician. His father was a chemist. He had been told growing up that if you couldn't explain an idea simply, you didn't understand it. He's bored at the cafe. He starts thinking about a problem. How would you find the shortest path between 2 cities on a map? In 20 minutes, with no paper, no pencil, while sipping coffee, he invents an algorithm so elegant it is now used billions of times a day. Every time your phone gives you directions, Dijkstra's ghost is in the route. Every time a packet of data crosses the internet, his algorithm is somewhere in the decision. Every time an air traffic controller plots the next leg of a flight path, those 20 minutes in Amsterdam are still doing the work. But here's what matters about that moment. Dijkstra didn't just solve a puzzle. He demonstrated something the field hadn't fully understood yet, that there are clever ways and dumb ways to compute, and the gap between them is the difference between possible and impossible. Sorting a list of 1 billion numbers, the dumb way, would take centuries. The clever way takes about 30 seconds. Same problem? Same machine? The algorithm is everything. This is the moment computer science stopped being about machines and started being about ideas. Dijkstra later said something that should be carved into every classroom. Computer science is no more about computers than astronomy is about telescopes. He spent the rest of his life arguing that programming was a branch of mathematics, that elegance mattered more than cleverness, and that most code being written was, in his view, a slow-motion catastrophe. He was probably right. We just didn't listen. The second rupture is bigger and weirder. In 1971, a Canadian researcher named Stephen Cook proved something that haunts the field to this day. He found a class of problems, call them NP problems, that share a strange property. If you have a candidate solution, you can verify it quickly. If you tell me a route through 30 cities, I can check its length in seconds. But finding that solution from scratch, nobody knows if it can be done quickly. Nobody has proven it can. Nobody has proven it can't. This is the P versus NP problem, and it is the most important unanswered question in computer science. The Clay Mathematics Institute will pay you $1 million if you settle it. Hundreds of careers have been spent trying. Many quietly broken in the trying. The problem has a particular cruelty. It looks tractable, like something a clever undergraduate could solve over a long weekend, and it has resisted 50 years of the planet's best minds. Why does it matter? Because almost every hard problem in modern life, protein folding, cryptography, optimal scheduling, machine learning, sits inside this NP class. If P equals NP, every one of those problems has a fast solution we just haven't found yet. Cures for diseases unfold overnight. Encryption collapses in an afternoon. Banking, privacy, the entire internet, gone. If P does not equal NP, which most computer scientists quietly believe, then there is a permanent ceiling on what we can compute efficiently. And a great deal of human progress will always require approximation, luck, or brute force. Notice the pattern here. Each layer of the field reveals a deeper limit underneath it. Turing showed some problems cannot be solved at all. Then we asked, among the ones that can, which can be solved fast? And the answer turned out to be, we don't know, and we may never know. And trillions of dollars of global infrastructure are quietly betting on the second possibility. The field keeps discovering that the rules are stricter than they looked yesterday. And somehow, on top of these stricter and stricter rules, the engineers keep building cathedrals. Which brings us to the third rupture, and this one is happening right now, in your lifetime, while you watch this. For 70 years, computer science assumed that programs are written by humans. You sit down, you write logic, the machine executes it. In 2017, a team at Google published a paper called "Attention is All You Need." It described a kind of model, the transformer, that doesn't follow rules a human wrote. It learns patterns from data and generates outputs that look intelligent without anyone, anywhere, knowing exactly why. The system that wrote a poem for your friend's wedding last week is, in a real and disturbing sense, unprogrammed. We trained it. We did not write it. The difference matters. For the first time since Turing, the relationship between the human and the machine has flipped. Instead of telling the computer what to do, we are showing it examples and letting it infer its own procedures. And the procedures it invents, inside billions of numerical weights, are largely incomprehensible even to the people who built them. The engineers at the Frontier Labs are no longer authors, they are gardeners. They tend systems they cannot fully read. They run tests and pray. This is the strangest moment in the history of the field. The discipline that began with Turing trying to define exactly what a procedure was has produced procedures nobody can read. Computer science just discovered something it didn't know existed: code without authors. Whether this is an evolution or a betrayal of the original idea is something the next generation will have to argue about. You are, whether you wanted to be or not, in the room. Let's pull back. After 80 years of breakthroughs and breakdowns, the field can be understood through a small framework. 3 forces, in tension with each other, that explain almost everything. Once you see them, you cannot stop seeing them. Here's the first force, abstraction. Computer science survives by hiding complexity inside boxes and forgetting how the boxes work. When you write a line of Python, you're not thinking about machine code. When you click an app icon, you're not thinking about syscalls. Each layer trusts the one below it and serves the one above it. This is how a single human can build something that involves a billion transistors firing in coordinated rhythm. We don't understand the whole. We understand our slice, and we trust the slices below us. The consequence is brutal. When a layer near the bottom fails, a tiny security bug in OpenSSL, a flaw in a chip's branch predictor, a forgotten log 4J vulnerability sitting in libraries used by half the Fortune 500, the failure ripples upward through every layer that trusted it, and suddenly half the internet is vulnerable for a week. And then the second-order effect arrives, slower and more permanent. Every fix has to be patched into every layer above it, which means a single bug in a low-level library can demand thousands of engineering hours from companies that didn't write the code, didn't approve it, and didn't even know they were using it. Your bank account, your medical records, the password on your kid's school portal, all of them sit on a stack of abstractions written by strangers in the 1990s, maintained on weekends by volunteers in countries you'll never visit. Abstraction is the gift that lets civilization scale. It's also the reason civilization is fragile in ways nobody can fully audit. The second force is harder: complexity. Every algorithm has a cost. How does its running time grow as the input grows? Some algorithms scale beautifully, double the input, double the time. Some scale catastrophically, double the input, and the time grows by a factor of 1,000. The entire engineering challenge of modern computing is forcing problems into the first category and out of the second. When you Google something and get a result in 0.3 seconds, what you're actually paying for is decades of work to make a search of trillions of documents feel like a search of 10. The second-order consequence is that every product you use is, secretly, an argument about which problems are worth solving fast and which are quietly being approximated. The recommendation engine doesn't show you the best video for you. It shows you a video that's probably good enough, computed in a few milliseconds, because the actual best video would take 3 weeks to find. The dating app doesn't show you your soulmate. It shows you the locally optimal match within the constraints of a budget the engineers were given, and the third-order consequence is the one nobody wants to talk about. As approximations stack on top of approximations across an entire industry, the gap between what the system actually computed and what users believe it computed widens until nobody, including the engineers, can say with confidence what the answer really means. You are constantly receiving educated guesses dressed up as certainty. The whole digital world is a polite fiction about precision. And then there's the third force, and this one cuts deeper. Trust. Every line of code you run was written by someone you don't know. Every chip in your laptop was manufactured in a factory you've never visited, on an island most of your government can't locate without a map. Every server your data passes through is owned by a company whose incentives may not align with yours. Computer science, as a practical matter, is the management of trust at impossible scale. Cryptography exists not because math is interesting, but because 2 strangers on opposite ends of the planet need to exchange secrets without ever meeting. Operating systems exist not just to run programs, but to keep them from sabotaging each other. The blockchain, for all the noise around it, is a sincere attempt to remove trust from the equation entirely. The consequence in your life is everywhere. Every time you tap a card, log in, send a message, or download an update, you are placing a small bet on a system of trust you cannot personally verify. Most of the time, the bet pays off. The times it doesn't are why identity theft is a $50 billion a year industry, and why a single misplaced update from a security firm called CrowdStrike grounded thousands of flights in 2024 and broke hospitals on 3 continents in a single morning. The second-order effect is that as the systems get larger, individual humans lose the ability to opt out. You cannot personally verify the firmware in your pacemaker. You cannot personally audit the algorithm setting your insurance premium. You cannot meaningfully refuse the model deciding whether your resume reaches a human reviewer. Trust, at this scale, stops being a choice and becomes a condition of being alive in the 21st century. Refusing it is no longer available as an option. It was quietly retired sometime around 2010, and nobody sent the memo. Abstraction, complexity, trust. 3 forces constantly pulling against each other. Make something more abstract, and you usually pay in complexity. Make it less complex, and you usually have to expand the circle of trust. Tighten the trust, and the abstraction starts to leak. Every product, every protocol, every architecture is a specific compromise between these 3. Once you know the framework, you can read the news differently. A data breach, a failure of trust, a laggy app, a failure of complexity, a platform that nobody can understand or audit, a failure of abstraction. The framework doesn't go away, it just changes outfits. You now understand why computer science isn't really about computers, what Turing's imaginary machine actually proved about the limits of computation, why the difference between solvable and tractable runs underneath your daily life, and the 3 forces, abstraction, complexity, and trust, that explain every system you'll ever use. That's 4 years of a computer science degree, the foundations, the ruptures, the framework, and the uncomfortable truth that a discipline obsessed with logic produced machines whose behavior we no longer fully understand. In 20 minutes, skip the degree. Computer science, in the end, is not the study of machines. It's the study of what humans can outsource to a procedure, what we cannot, and what we lose every time we decide the difference. The tape keeps moving. The head keeps reading. Somewhere in a building you'll never see, a model is generating the next sentence of someone's life. A medical diagnosis, a loan decision, a sentencing recommendation, a love letter. We used to write our tools. Now our tools write back. The math is just the bookkeeping. The choices about what to compute and what to leave alone are the thing. They always were, they always will be. The machine cannot make them for us, no matter how convincingly it pretends. If this video earned its runtime, the cost of staying is small. Subscribe. The marginal effort is 1 click. The compounding return is the next discipline abstracted into 20 minutes, delivered to you without the 4-year overhead. Run the trade. The next layer of the stack is already loading.